Hello and welcome to the second reading from the Filmgoer's Guide to God by Tim Cawkwell. Last week we read the prologue, or I did, and God's Grace and God's Silence, where we dealt with Diary of a Country Priest, Winterlight and Under Satan's Sun. Today we'll be looking at Faith. And the films mentioned will be Nostalgia, Andrei Rublev and Stalker. Someone asked me who the publisher was. Darton Longman Todd. And the author is, or certainly was in 2004, a steward of the cathedral of the city I live in. And was actually a filmmaker, and he's a co-author of the World Encyclopedia of Film. And before I continue, I'll read the title. I'll read the back of it. And the Filmgoer's Guide to God is an elegant exploration of how film, the dominant art form of the 20th century, has treated religious themes. Against the turbulent backdrop of a century of total war, of genocide, of utter cynicism, Tim Cawkwell outlines how the new medium of film mirrored and shaped these troubled narratives and offered fresh perspectives on the crisis of faith. Cinema emerges as a powerful medium for illuminating religious themes in new ways. How people manifest compassion for each other, how they transcend a sin such as pride, how they receive unexpected grace, how some redemptive circumstance can heal the human consciousness of meaningless suffering. And when I say the sin such as pride, I don't literally mean the pride people as such. I don't mean the LGBT people. I mean everyone. I don't just mean them. I mean everyone. Everyone has pride. And it's a sin. I'm not looked into why it's a sin, but you can be proud of someone so long as you're righteously proud of someone, and not just proud of something for anything. But that could get controversial, so I'll continue. Tim Cawkwell's study takes in a wide range of European and American cinema and focuses in detail on the particular contribution of four filmmakers: Bresson, Dreyer, Rossellini and Tarkovsky. And films discussed include Diary of a Country Priest, Night of the Hunter, Brighton Rock, O Brother Where Art Thou, Rome, Open City, The Passion of Joan of Arc and Babette's Feast, among others, and concludes with a chapter on the films of the Gospel, calling for a radical engagement with this story of stories. So, as I said, tonight we'll be looking at Faith. Well, today it's about 1:45 in the morning, and I'm reading it now, so it goes out to my American listeners who can listen to it as they get up preparing for their whatever they do on Sunday. So it's the second reading, but it's chapter 3 because the prologue was the first chapter for some reason. The prologue. So, in the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise. And that's W.H. Auden in memory of W.B. Yeats. Bressons, Bergmans and Pierlat's priests are all created in response to a crisis of faith in the West, articulating a new uncertainty in the way we perceive the Church, repository of eternal values. There is therefore a certain irony in the fact that the filmmaker, who turned out to be a remarkable advocate of the certain need for faith, came out of the brutal experiment with atheism conducted in the Soviet Union. Born after the revolution of 1917, Andrei Tarkovsky might have emerged as a pure product of scientific atheism. The new Soviet man, free of obscurantism and confident in the achievements of communism. The opposite is the case. Tarkovsky's heroes are seekers of meaning who find it in innocent faith, in reconciliation, in sacrifice, even in holy foolishness. Their stories are ones of pilgrimage, They are engaged in a mental journey, and usually a physical one as well, through the chaos or the spiritual emptiness around them, until they find a point where faith can be asserted and a resolution found. In Nostalgia, he depicts his hero, Andrei Gorchakov, in the abbey of San Galgano in Tuscany. The camera starts in the north aisle and tracks across rather than down the abbey, moving from north aisle to nave, where it picks up Gorchakov walking aimlessly and follows him to the south aisle. Coming to a rest, the camera shows him gazing upwards and then turning and walking away. The scene is an arresting one because the abbey is a ruined Cistercian building, the abbot having sold off the lead in the 16th century, with the result that the roof finally collapsed in 1786. Since then it has stood open to the elements, and the floors are now earth and grass. But this setting, which is what strikes the viewer at first, is only half the picture. As we gaze at Gorchakov, we eavesdrop on a conversation on the soundtrack. A, which is a female voice: "Lord, don't you see how he's asking? Say something to him." The B, male voice: "But what would happen if he heard my voice?" "Let him feel your presence." "I always do, but he's not aware of it." Gorchakov is a writer in Italy, researching a Russian composer who had lived there in the 18th century. Like his subject, and indeed like the director of the film, he suffers from an intense longing to return to Russia, hence the film's title, Nostalgia. Not used in the pallid sense common now, but in the Homeric sense of Odysseus's longing, nostos, to return to the homeland, a feeling that can produce not just melancholy but despair. Tarkovsky even went so far as to define it as a global yearning for the whole of existence. Gorchakov is in fact his double, and the film an analysis of the dislocation Tarkovsky experienced personally in being separated from Russia and his family after 1982. But in this particular scene he charges the feeling of nostalgia with a spiritual electricity, since the two voices on the soundtrack are none other than those of one of God's angels and of God himself. The cultural undercurrents of the film and the way they reflect on its maker are especially intriguing. Tarkovsky is Russian, but he is also Soviet Russian. Born in 1932, a boy through the darkest days of Stalinism, 12 at the time of the Soviet Union's great victory over Nazi Germany in 1945, spending his formative years during Soviet communism's period of stability before the forces of implosion began seriously to take hold, and dying in 1986, just as perestroika was beginning to dissolve the Soviet Union. He was a natural dissident with a sure conviction of his vocation, not just as a filmmaker but also as an artist in the Russian tradition, holding that there was no more important human enterprise on earth than the artistic one. But his dissidence is displayed to no greater effect than his clinging to the centrality of religious belief against not just the Marxist-Leninist tide but also the fashionable intellectual West. His films are utterly without irony. He viewed the making of great art as meeting a spiritual need, an ethical project central to the development of society, an endeavour to explain the meaning of existence. Like religion, which is rooted in an intuition about the world which leads to faith, art is a kind of detector of infinity, as he wrote in his artistic credo, Sculpting in Time. In his diaries from 1970 to 1986, Tarkovsky notes his interest in a wide range of spiritual thinkers and ideas: parapsychology, Rudolf Steiner's philosophy, Radha Krishnan Castaneda's transcendental meditation, yoga, Buddhism, Gurdjieff. But the bedrock to this interest in the spiritual appears to be the Christian faith. One remarkable sequence in his Andrei Rublev enacts the crucifixion in a snowy landscape, and in the same film he quotes the passage about love from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. His favourite piece of music was Bach's St. John Passion. Tarkovsky's first full-length film, Ivan's Childhood, Ivan as we would say, 1962, or Ivan is John in Russian, brought him to international notice when it won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, but it was the making of his next film, Andrei Rublev, in 1966, that brought him fame. Not that this happened instantly. The film is over 3 hours long and was 3 years in the making. Although they had allowed it to be made in the first place, it was then banned from public view by the Soviet authorities for 5 years. It did not reach the West until 1972, yet because news seeped out of this extraordinary film, which the Soviets had tried to suppress, its reputation had preceded it. When it was put on show both in the Soviet Union and in the West, its impact was remarkable. While on first viewing many people find Tarkovsky's other films slow and impenetrable, Rublev remains approachable and overwhelming. Nor is the story of its making ended, because in the past few years a longer version has appeared, adding 39 minutes to the first, enhancing its epic quality and revealing more closely Tarkovsky's original intentions over which he had to comprise. Finally, a version reputedly some 4 hours long was shown in Moscow in 1988. Although Tarkovsky is the prophet of faith, he could hardly have been more the victim of doubt. Rublev is a parable of faith overcoming chaos, but for much of its huge length, doubt and confusion hold the upper hand. It starts in 1400 and ends in 1423. At the beginning, Rublev is one of 3 monks who shelter from the rain in a hut crowded with peasants being entertained by a jester. The scene ends when the latter is brutally arrested by soldiers. One of the monks is Kirill, who meets with the icon painter Theophanes, the Greek, and remarks of Rublev that he has no awe, no faith, and this is undermining his art. This section is a pair with the following one entitled The Passion According to Andrei, 1406. In it, Rublev meets Theophanes, who argues, as Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor in The Brothers Karamazov had done, that if Jesus were to return to earth, he would be crucified again. This is followed by the vision of the crucifixion at Calvary being reenacted in the snow. In the next section, Rublev on his travels is drawn into witnessing pagan rites on St. John's Night and is tempted by a woman. This moment of faithlessness leads into section 5, showing him at work in a pristine monastery, seeking to find a way of painting the walls. But inspiration has deserted him, and Rublev is too paralysed to begin. Section 6 is set in 1408, as the previous 2 had been, and the 3 comprise a trio: Distraction by Temptation, section 4, Alienation by Loss of Inspiration, section 5, and Destruction by Devastation, section 6. This 6th section depicts, in the second longest sequence in the film, the sacking of the Russian town of Vladimir by invading Tatars amid scenes of confusion, terror and cruelty. Rublev is caught in the thick of it, and in rescuing a woman from an attacker, he kills him. Shocked by this act of violence, he makes a vow neither to paint nor even to speak. Section 7, entitled The Silence, 1412, shows Rublev's nadir. The land is paralysed by famine and occupied by the Tatars. Rublev returns with the woman he has rescued to the monastery and finds the monks there, like himself, utterly dispirited. When the invaders take off the woman he has saved, he is unable to prevent them. The scene is set for the climax of the film. To bring Rublev's story to a conclusion, Tarkovsky jumps 11 years to 1423 and daringly switches the focus of the last section to show how a young boy, Boris, casts a new bell for the Grand Prince. Boris's father had been a bell maker but had died in the plague. When the prince's men come looking for him, Boris, or rather Boriska, as he comes to be called, argues with them that with his father and the community dead, there's no one left to cast the bell. Take me. I know the secret from father. Initially reluctant, they do so in the absence of any alternative. Boriska then proceeds to cast a giant bell, which involves locating a suitable hillock in which to dig a large hole, finding the right clay, melting down a huge quantity of metal, removing the clay to reveal the bell, lifting it by a scaffold, ropes, and an army of helpers, and then testing the bell in front of the Grand Prince. This bare account barely hints at the massiveness of the undertaking. The boy has to overcome the scepticism of his team of workmen, but once he has done so, the project grows to embrace all the townspeople. Boriska achieves his task as a result of complete self-confidence. For example, short of metal for the casting, he orders the prince's men to give him another 18 pounds of silver. Only as the moment approaches when the bell must be rung to ensure it sounds true does he shrink from completing the task, the enormity of it only dawning on him At the end, failure to make a true bell would mean the execution of him and his fellow workers. The episode generates a wonderful suspense when the clapper is swung back and forth until finally it makes an arc long enough to strike the bell. A rich sound breaks over the silence, and the relief of success is accompanied by an explosion of joy in the crowd. The twist in the tale is that Boriska had not inherited the secret of bell casting from his father, who it turns out had refused to tell him before he died. Boriska's success is based on half-knowledge and intuition. The film does not, however, end with Boriska, but with Rublev. As the bell-making gets underway, Rublev turns up and, fascinated by the proceedings, stays in as an observer. Boriska's completion of the task is enough to shake Rublev from his vow of silence and his refusal to paint. After Boriska confesses to him that he did not, after all, know the secret, Rublev breaks into speech again, telling him that they will work together. You cast in bells, I paint in icons. Drawing inspiration from the young boy's innocent faith in his power to succeed, Rublev lays aside his deep inhibition. In a coup de cinéma, the film moves from black and white to colour and ends in a blaze of icons, while Ovshinnikov's choral music strives to prolong the moment of resolution to celebrate Rublev's flowering. The very last image is of 4 horses grazing by a river in the rain. Ostensibly, the film is about artistic achievement, and, like nostalgia, has a strong autobiographical element. Rublev and Boris are both aspects of Tarkovsky, the former his doubtful self, struggling in the spiritual desert of Soviet society to give expression to his inner world, the latter his innocent self, who, 32 years old, and only on his second feature, undertakes a film which, like The Bell, is made on a massive scale and triumphs at the end. The creating of The Bell has a documentary feel. It is as if Tarkovsky got his cast to carry out in real life the making of a bell while he filmed it, so that the army of helpers involved will have reflected the conditions of the production. Several shots are long, sweeping camera tracks and cranes in order to do justice to the communal efforts involved. The sieving activity in front of the camera will have been matched by that behind it. What motivated Tarkovsky to undertake such a project? Andrei Rublev gives an answer: faith in oneself. His book of essays on the cinema, Sculpting in Time, repeats the message. In writing about the reaction to Mirror and his belief that the audience would put aside their initial incomprehension and come to see its qualities, Tarkovsky wrote, "In the end we were saved by one thing only, faith. The belief that since our work was so important to us, it would not but become equally important to the audience." Tarkovsky has an exalted view of the artist as articulating the most intimate and vital truths about the meaning of human existence. When in his diary in 1977 he had written, "A person has no need of society, it is society that needs him," he means that it is creative individuals who shape and lead society, not social structures and organisations. In Sculpting in Time, he accuses the Church of caricaturing social institutions. The Church shows no sign of being able to redress the balance with a call to a spiritual awakening. Hence, art is called to express the absolute freedom of man's spiritual position. The camera is mightier than the cope. This confidence in the artistic process explains the seriousness with which Tarkovsky approached his filmmaking. When he died, he had only 7 full-length films to his credit, spread over 25 years. This paucity of finished work derives in part from the obstructions put in his way by the authorities, but there is a deeper reason. His obsessive perfectionist approach meant that projects went through several versions before they were completed, and are all the better for going through this refining process. Secondly, the conviction that his films should reveal his innermost thoughts and concerns means that despite their disparate subject matter, war film, historical epic, science fiction, autobiography, modern drama, there is a remarkable unity to the corpus. The most notable example is a recurrent fascination with water, especially, but not only, still water. The flooded winter landscape of Ivan's childhood, the rain in Rublev, the image of the waving weeds in the stream that opens Solaris, the dream in Mirror of his mother washing her hair in a tub, the flooded wasteland of Stalker, the drowned house in Nostalgia, and little man in the sacrifice watering the barren tree until it sprouts. Tarkovsky's images are not, I think, intended to be symbolic, but, for example, by its rhythm and by the sense of the eternal it conveys. The image of horses in the pouring rain, which closes Andrei Rublev, is meant to convey a sense of completion and fulfillment. Sorry. Another idea to fascinate him was how we might bring into existence our innermost thoughts and desires. It is first encountered in the science fiction Solaris. Chris travels to the space station to find the astronauts troubled by the influence of the planet Solaris, which they have been sent to study. It has the power to bring to life the observer's subconscious, with the result that Chris, obsessed with the loss of his wife, Harry, soon finds her materializing before him and then decaying, a false resurrection. In Nostalgia, Gorchakov's girlfriend visits a church to see Piero della Francesca's Madonna of Childbirth, where she discovers that women make the pilgrimage to see it in order to realize their wishes for a child. That the wish expressed in prayer can be brought to fulfillment then becomes the hinge of the drama in Nostalgia and the Sacrifice. In his diary in 1970, Tarkovsky had written, "Thank God for people who burn themselves alive in front of an impassive, wordless crowd." This idea is realized in Nostalgia, where Domenico burns himself to death in the Piazza del Campidoglio in Rome in order to save mankind, while The Sacrifice is the story of Alexander, who, on the threshold of nuclear catastrophe, prays to God that he might avert it if he sacrifices all the comforts of the world, home, possessions, links with his family. Domenico and Alexander, like Boriska in Rublev, take the giant step out of this material world into the unknown in order to release some innermost essence in human beings for love and creativity. For us as audience, things only exist when we see them. When we do not see them, they do not exist. For Tarkovsky as creator, art can make visible things we had not seen, can raise into existence a supposedly invisible world. In this he belongs emphatically to the 20th century, when the new science of psychology was added to the traditional ones, and when the new art of cinema joined the historical muses. As newcomers, film and psychology feel an instant attraction, for when combined they bring to light the unmentionable, the ineffable, the unthinkable, the unimaginable. Led by them, stumbling into daylight after centuries of imprisonment in the human mind, have come images of the horrid and the terrifying, the obscene and the erotic, the weird and the extraordinary. Only the cinema has the necessary artifice to represent this new reality, overlaying the world with a tissue of dreams and nightmares. Yet the seeming boundlessness of the human imagination still finds human action imprisoned. Take a film in which the characters construct a barrier invisible to the spectator that roots them to the spot, prevents them getting food and drink, turns their claustrophobia to thoughts of murder. Such is the premise of Louis Buñuel's The Exterminating Angel. A group of about 20 people retire to the music room after their main meal, listen to a piano recital, then feel that it is time to go, but cannot bring themselves to leave the room. Instead they lie down to sleep, but the next day is no better, nor the day after that. For the spectator there is no barrier visible. For the actors in their roles, an obstacle they cannot see but cannot cross pens them in. I'm just seeing if that's one of the films listed. No, we've mentioned all three of the films. It is an interesting speculation that among the films Tarkovsky saw in Moscow in the early 1960s, in the window of the Khrushchev 4, was The Exterminating Angel. Buñuel is among the handful of film directors even he put in his pantheon in Sculpting in Time, along with Bresson, Bergman, Kurosawa, Mitsuguchi, Antonioni, Fellini, Vigo, and Dovzhenko. Did the idea lodge in his mind then as a fruitful cinematic device? Buñuel's allegory is about the monumental inadequacy of human relations. Life is spiteful, malicious, vicious, Desires struggle to be fulfilled and fail. Not too long. Bunwell is certainly the central figure in the filmgoer's guide to godlessness. He rejoices in paradox. An absurd situation is made believable by cinema. The miraculous imagination of the filmmaker is used to depict the human failure to take imaginative action. Everywhere we erect our own prison walls. If Tarkovsky had seen The Exterminating Angel, when he comes to take up the idea, he makes something different. His cinematic imagination creates a forbidden zone. After entering it illegally, 3 men make their way to its centre. They are surrounded by nature, but it is not paradise. Their journey is through derelict buildings overwhelmed by growth, sinking in mud and water. At the centre of this zone is a decaying industrial building, and at the centre of the building is a room where the most cherished dreams come true. Not our surface desires, but the deep down ones, maybe for universal peace or universal chaos, for spiritual peace or spiritual power, for an encounter with the divine or the diabolical. This room is first described verbally to the spectator. Second, when the 3 men are on its threshold, it is imagined off-screen by the spectator. Finally, when it comes to the close encounter, it is revealed to the spectator as a void, a large brick-lined space whose floor is a pool of water from whose ceiling natural light filters down. As in the Buñuel film, the 3 are unable to bring themselves to go in. This scene is the climax of Stalker. To link Tarkovsky with Buñuel is to take 2 poles, the one of affirming, the other of rejecting God as an ultimately fruitful goal for human seeking. For both, life is mired in suffering. For Buñuel, that there is no exit is a tragedy. For Tarkovsky, the exit is only reached through the need for deep change in human beings. Buñuel's worldview is a cul-de-sac. Tarkovsky's a route to fulfillment. Watching Stalker is like being in a cathedral. Like Gorchakov in San Galgano, you wanted to come but were not sure why. Now you are here, its splendour is overwhelming, but where is its heart? Where is it leading? And when you are close to what you came for, do you recognise it? And when you recognise it, can you make it your own? Can you bring to fruition your most cherished desire? The leader of the group of 3 men is the Stalker, honoured in the title of the film. He makes his living by taking paying customers into the zone past guarded checkpoints at risk to life, but once he is inside, the guards are too frightened to pursue. The Stalker is an individual who ekes out an existence at the margins, a social dissident, the last who in fact may be first. The 2 accompanying him are portentously named writer and scientist, that is to say representatives of 2 classes with privileged status in 20th century society, having usurped some of the church's power to influence and determine what humans should think and do. Despite their portrayal as worldly and world-weary, Tarkovsky is anxious to show that there is still some inmost part of them that is not satisfied. Having concluded that literary success and making scientific discoveries have a limit to their value, they want to go into the zone, to find the room, to see this great thing of which they have heard. But having got there, the writer will not go in and pour scorn on the humiliation of praying, while the scientist produces a bomb with which he contemplates blowing up the room on the grounds that it cannot bring anyone any hope. When the distraught Stalker fights with the scientist over the bomb, the writer prevents the Stalker. The scientist then accuses the writer of being a hypocrite. The writer turns on the Stalker for not going into the room himself and accuses him of being a parasite on the 2 pilgrims, seeking only to exercise power over them until the Stalker tearfully explains he is not allowed to enter the room. At this the recriminations subside. When the writer almost topples into the room by accident, the Stalker stops him. The writer wears an air of contrition. The scientist dismantles his bomb, renders it ineffectual, and throws away the different parts. Tarkovsky then makes a major cut from action to transcendental stasis. The camera switches to a view of the room, giving the spectator a first sight of this spiritual space. At the far end, the 3 men sit down on the threshold and gaze into it, and the Stalker wistfully imagines coming to lie there with his wife and child. Ostensibly, Stalker works both as film theatre and as cinema, and one of the creative tensions in watching it is for the spectator to resolve which is the more important. It is theatrical because of the bravura performance by the three actors, Kajdanowski, Solonitsin, and Grinko, using all their skill with gesture and voice to embody Tarkovsky's pilgrims. It is theatrical too because of the density of the script. Tarkovsky's most explicit meditation on the religio-philosophical themes that obsessed him. For a moment one can be seduced into imagining the drama finding its essence in a theatre where both actor and spectator can both concentrate without distraction on the words of the message. But Tarkovsky is a filmmaker who reserves his most intense moments for image and sound combined. This means that there are two ways of experiencing the scene at the room. The first is to try and follow the conflicts between the three men's view of the world as it is expressed in words, only to conclude that the motivation is obscure. For example, why does the writer stop Stalker from wresting the bomb from the scientist, and their situation artificial? The second is to absorb all the verbal sparring, but to balance it with what Tarkovsky does with his camera. That is to say, to capture the shifting relationships of the three men by its movements and their movements, to use close-ups on faces to reveal their experience, their suffering, their humanity, and then to crown the scene with something virtuosic. A shot lasting 7 minutes, beginning in apparent banality, a view of an ugly and depressing space, and ending in the profound stillness of reconciliation, of light falling on water, on the sound of single water drops echoing in space, and maybe of drawing the spectator to a moment of prayer for his or her most cherished desire. Tarkovsky was very drawn to miracles and wonders. The dead boy soldier, Ivan, playing on some sunlit shore in Ivan's childhood, the medieval peasant on a balloon flight in Andrei Rublev, Hari's resurrection in Solaris, a blazing barn in the forest, Mirror, Gorchakov carrying the lit candle the length of St. Catherine's Pool at Bagno Vignoni as the final healing of his troubled mind, Nostalgia, a levitating witch in The Sacrifice. The miracle of Stalker is more hidden. When Parsifal first witnesses the ceremony of Holy Communion in Wagner's opera of that name, he is at first baffled by the sight, so no miracle occurs. Similarly, with the writer and scientist on the threshold of the room, no miracle. But Tarkovsky is showing us that they are witnesses at some Eucharistic moment, when once the miracle of faith is achieved, they can realize their deepest desire, find their innermost being. While the single shot of the room is the climax, it is not the end. Tarkovsky adds a remarkable coda. He cuts from the room to a scene of the stalker with his two travellers, plus the dog who joined them on the journey, back outside the zone from which they started. His wife and child come to collect him. The three return to their home, where the stalker, overcome by despair, lies on the floor crying. They don't believe in anything. Their capacity for faith has atrophied through lack of use. His wife tries to calm him and puts him to bed. Then she goes to the corner of the room and delivers a monologue direct to the camera, that is, to the spectator, explaining why she became his wife, that he's one of God's fools, but she's never regretted marrying him. It brought grief, fear, and pain, but this is just faith, life, it's us. Without sorrow there is no happiness, without happiness there is no hope. And next week, God willing, the subject will be salvation of water, salvation by water even. And the films we will be looking at will be Sullivan's Travels, O Brother, Where Art Thou?, The Apostle, and The Night of the Hunter. So until next time, God willing, may God bless you all. Amen.